I'm joined here today by three guests, Derek Linty, who's New Mexico State Representative, and Juan Ray Abeyta, who's Isleta Pueblo and is a Tribal Council member, and Glenaba Martinez, who is with the University of New Mexico College of Education. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
And Glenaba, tell us, what does Native student success look like to you?
Well, actually, it's interesting you're asking me. I just finished a lecture talking about that. Native student success to me means that Native students are able to understand their core values as a Native person, whether they're one of the 23 nations in New Mexico or elsewhere, but that they understand the core values, they can speak and understand their language, can communicate effectively in the Native language, that they are full participants in their cultural activities at home, and understand their obligations to community. And at the same time, they are also someone who has acquired the skills and knowledge that they feel that they would want to pursue in terms of a profession or a vocation of some sort. To me, it's really understanding, navigating the different skill sets and forms of knowledge.
And what about you, Juan Ray?
Native American educational success. I agree with a lot with what Ms. Martinez has says, and to grow upon that a little bit, you know, I like to see Native American students who go out there, find the tools in the world, and then come back home and figure out how to apply those tools. Not how we would in American society, but how do we apply these tools and adopt them to who we are as Native Americans, and figure out how to grow our own tools or adapt them or make hybrids, but to create what we need with our Native American students, which is tribal leaders. And we need them to be warriors, but we need them to be warriors now with education. We need lawyers, we need doctors. We need these future leaders to come back home and to really embolden our sovereignty on our reservations. And that's where I see Native American educational success in the long-term goal and the vision.
And as a tribal leader yourself, how do you see your impact in that?
As a tribal leader, I try to do the hardest thing there is to do, which is just try to lead by example. Take every day as a learning experience. Take every mistake as a lesson to learn from. And you know, you try to promote that in your community so that your community knows that everyone's not perfect, and that they can make mistakes. And it's not about making the mistake, but how you get back up and how you carry yourself and how you learn from those mistakes. And so I think as a tribal leader, it's very hard to be a politic. And I don't like the word politic. Because politics, they just talk about money. And tribal leaders, they talk about the problems and problem solving. And that's where I'm headed, and that's how I try to make my change, is ideologically, but maybe spreading a message that will change people's hearts to make them want to do better in their communities.
And we also have a political person with us as well. So what does it look like to you? And your role as a politician, what does it look like to you to have Native student success?
I don't know if I necessarily like the word politician either. I don't consider myself a politician, but to answer your question, I still am of the opinion that it takes a village to raise a child. And in our instances in New Mexico, it takes tribes to raise a child. And in my world, student success, Native student success, does incorporate that it takes a village. It's going to take the immediate family at home. It's going to take the immediate vicinity of the folks that live around the community, extended family, tribal leaders. Once you get out of that realm, then you look to schools, school districts, the teachers, the administrators. Then you move up the chain to policymakers in the hopes that they are allocating the funds appropriately, that they're making the right decisions on behalf of their Native students in hopes that they'll succeed. And if all of those things can come together, success is then laid out for the Native kid. And it's upon them then to just take all those tools that they have with them and hopefully follow a path and become successful.
And do you see school districts in New Mexico meeting that need?
There's some. there are absolutely some school districts that are stepping up to the plate, that are making those conscious decisions, those small changes in priorities and how they spend money and how they utilize fundings that they receive federally or through the state to ensure that like I said, funds are being appropriated to whether it be culturally competent or culturally relevant, culturally relevant experiences like language programs or like other efforts that they have in regards to how a Native student will succeed in a public school forum. There are also other examples down the way, but unfortunately, Native students still stagger far behind other ethnicities in regards to success in the public school arena.
And Glenaba, in your research, looking at what we're talking about, and when it comes to even looking at these statistics about Native students in different areas and compared to their counterparts, what do you see needs to be done when it comes to either programming or policy?
Well, I think when you look at, like for example, in today's Albuquerque Journal, there are 2 articles related to Native American student achievement. And what's concerning is the fact that the assessments that they use, we have to question whether or not they're authentic assessments. Are they truly testing what students know? And then the other concern about it is the fact that I wonder about what a student has to, the compromise that takes place for a student to be successful using Western constructions of assessment. For example, oftentimes you'll have test items, verbal test items, for example, in the SAT or ACT exams, college entrance exams, that are looking for a specific type of content knowledge, which may well be complementary of what that Native student may know as a Native person who comes from Taos Pueblo, for example, but maybe that particular concept runs contrary to how they experience it as a Native person growing up at Taos Pueblo. So my concern is about assessment, but I believe that right now the policies that we have, I think we have good intentions. We have a lot of good people working hard at the 23 school districts as well as at the different levels from national level down to local levels, as well as in the state legislature. But I'm a little concerned about the executive branch with the executive branch using veto power over some key legislation that would have helped our Native students in terms of programming. So when I think about educational achievement, I think about curriculum, what counts as knowledge and whose interests are served with that knowledge base. I think about policy, and I think about what are the policies in the school, all the way from extracurricular activity participation to school attire and all the different things of the daily lived experiences of being a Native student, to assessment and what counts as assessment and what are people looking at. And I think that we are in a current state of high stakes testing, and I'm very concerned that the things that programs like Native language instruction that Christine Sims has with the Native Language Center at UNM, I'm afraid that some of that may become marginalized in the interest of trying to get students to do well on the PARCC or the SBA or any of the other assessments that they use in the districts.
And Derek, she had mentioned, Glenaba had mentioned a bill, which was your bill.
Right. Oh, was it your bill?
Can you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about that?
House Bill 484 was a bill that I worked on with some of my counterparts in the Democratic caucus, but one that I sponsored alone simply because it was near and dear to my heart, because I was that Native student that went to the public school that saw things and experienced things that are still going on today in regards to how Native students achieve in public school forums. And so House Bill 484's intent was to simply bring together a method and accountability system, a systematic way to achieve certain goals to help Native students succeed. And what that meant was that they utilize the federal funding that each school district in the 23 school districts identified as historically having Native American students, how they can utilize that federal funding differently, not necessarily requesting new funding, but how they can prioritize how they utilize that funding for whether it be culturally relevant programs like language, or other places to where Native students are lacking far behind other ethnicities like math, like science, like reading, to ensure that they can escape being that low totem pole statistic and move their way up. And so the measure behind House Bill 484 was simply to utilize that federal funding differently. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, it was vetoed by our governor, Governor Martinez, to which she identified my legislation as an unfunded mandate. Unfortunately, she did not see the goal and the relevancy that my counterparts in the legislature on both sides of the aisle, both Republican and Democrat, found the legitimacy and found it relevant that this is a good piece of legislation, to which in the House it passed unanimously. In the Senate, I think there was probably about 5 votes that were in the opposition, but at the end of the day, we had a strong showing of support on behalf of Native American students in this state. And unfortunately, it'll have to wait another couple of years before I can run that again. But believe you me, is that we're going to push it, and we're going to make sure that our students, our Native students, will succeed.
And to piggyback on that one, Ray, of making sure Native students succeed if something, if the funding's not there or if a program isn't there, how important is community and family? And talk a little bit about how you see that playing into Native student success.
It's the core of the core. I mean, Representative Lenti hit on, the core. And I think also Ms. Martinez hit about the core. But that's the core. And what we're finding is that core has been deteriorated. And when you look at a socio-ecological model of that core and your levels of support that ripple out, it's supposed to be from the individual to sometimes the family member, to the larger family, to your clan, to your community, and then eventually ripples out to the legislature positions and how you make laws to protect your community. What I'm seeing in my community, and what I'm kind of seeing in a lot of the places, is that that core is no longer there. And sometimes an individual's first line of support is sometimes the organization, is sometimes JOM, is sometimes Indian education. The first level of support for some people is sometimes going to their tribal council leader, rather than trying to figure out the pieces in between and actually making a structure that works. So if the core is not there, and people are bypassing the core, then we have a system that's out of whack. And to me, that's what I'm kind of seeing is that, and especially in tribal communities, and I can't speak to all tribal communities, I only know my own tribal community and when I see it. But I think to restore that model and to become more dependent on that model incorporates teaching core values in your family, incorporates talking with your elders in your family to know your history, know where you're coming from, know the reasons why you do things. Reaching out to your programs in your community. We have a lot of programs in Isleta Pueblo. And sometimes it's hard for community members sometimes to even reach into those programs. But I don't know the reasons why either. Sometimes they're busy with their own life. Sometimes everyone's selling away their destiny to work a 9 to 5 to earn a paycheck. And again, everything seems to be tied to the economy. But coming from my perspective as a tribal leader and someone that wants something good for my community, money is not solving any problem anywhere. It all starts with the individual at that center of that core, what's in their heart, what's their core values, and amplifying those to get more people to stand firm together, to build a community, and to repair ourselves. Money is not going to do it. The United States government took away our rights a long time ago. We've been fighting 500 years to still get them back. So that system's not working. And we could look back 500 years and say it's not going to work. So as a tribal leader, that's one of the main things I need to do is repair the core. And then we start fixing our communities.
And Glenaba, you're shaking your head listening to what Juan Ray has to say. As an educator and somebody who's worked in the field for a long time, what needs to be done for Native students to inspire, empower them, and get them to cross the graduation line?
Well, I think that's a very important question to ask, and I think that we could ask it at the individual level. There may be some students who need that family support, or there may be some students who need that motivation from their teachers. For some students, it's participating in interscholastic sports or extracurricular activities that somehow enrich their experiences. For some students, it's about setting goals post-secondary education that inspire them to do things. For some people, it's this true love that you're talking about, this true commitment to your community, and you're answering the question, what can I do? What will be my contribution to my community? So you have to have some kind of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and that motivation may be cultural, it may be economic. For some students, it's about making money, and it may be political. They want some kind of power at some point. It may be cultural. So there's all kinds of reasons. But you know, I teach Native Studies at Foothill High School, which is Native youth who are incarcerated at YDDC and at Camino Nuevo. And I always think to myself, well, you know, where is all of this knowledge going? And I think to myself, well, when they're released, when these students are released into the public, I want them to feel empowered, and I want them to feel that in spite of what happened in their childhood to get them to that facility, that they can leave that facility and they can feel empowered and they can feel proud of who they are. Because if you feel proud about yourself, if you have high self-esteem, you're going to do a lot of good things. And sometimes that self-esteem is built culturally. I think about at Taos how we have a lot of young men and young women who participate, and it's beautiful when you see them and they're proud. They're proud of what they do, and they carry that pride with them to school. And so I think, like I said, individually, collectively, I think, you know, it's kind of like a Venn diagram. There's some things that overlap, and there's some things that are very specific.
And your thoughts on inspiring and empowering?
Allowing them to grow up and be who they are, and ensuring that they are proud of where they come from. At the end of the day, I go back to a statement that my dad taught me, is that you were born an Indian, you'll die an Indian. What happens between those 2 points in your life is incumbent upon how you live your life. And we have to be mindful that as we sit around this table, our forefathers, our ancestors, my grandfather and my great-grandfather, those are just 2 generations ago, were the ones that were taken from their homelands. Their hair was chopped, and they were taught not to speak their native language because it was wrong. And here we are now trying to become now recustomed to the Western way of education. And some of us have taken a role to where we had to find our way in doing so. And I do believe that if we can lead by example, like Councilman stated, that if we can lead by example, that we can show that there are identified people and places and experiences that folks have in this state that, yes, they went to a public school system. Yes, they went to college. Yes, they went on to do other things in their lives that were significant. If they can have that example and see that, then our children can say, it doesn't matter if I go to a public school, if I come from a broken home, if I have certain things that statistically I'm not supposed to succeed. The fact is that everybody is capable of success. Every single person, regardless of their ethnicity, social status, their financial capabilities, because at the end of the day, those students need to understand that everybody has a value, that they have a value, and that they are worth something, and that it takes those chance encounters, whether it be on the reservation, on the tribal lands, or their teachers at school, or their administrator, or someone they meet along the way, to just give them that encouragement. And I think if we can share that with our students, and we can show them and lead by example, they'll be more adept to expect success.
And any final thoughts, Juan Ray?
It's better when you give me a question.
Okay, just adding to just inspiring, empowering Native students to graduate.
Empowering and inspiring them. I'll tell you what, if this is a message to the students and to all the youth out there, you know, I'm looking for future leaders. I'm looking for future people to take on this responsibility, to embody what it is and bring those tools back to who we are as Native American people. That's who I'm looking for. If you want to be a warrior in your community, if you want to be a leader in your community, if you want to stand up for the rights of your community, if you want to make a difference and change the world, I'm looking for you. I'm asking you to start doing it, start making the smallest changes in your life, and add those changes and add them up over a year, add them up over 10 years, add them up over a high school diploma. And those small increments are going to add up to something great, and you're going to be great. So I'm looking for you to be great, and I'm looking for you to come back and be a leader and be educated and to carry on the cultures and the traditions and the language.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.